I think we're recording.
Hey guys, this is Ryan, and welcome to another episode of Blockchain Markets. And today I'm really excited because we're going to talk about a very interesting project that is not a blockchain. It's a distributed technology as well, but it is not a blockchain, as I said before. So then it's called Holochain, and I'm today with Matthew Schutte, that is going to tell us everything about Holochain. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And so just before we start, maybe if you can give us a bit of a background of yourself, and then we just talk afterwards about Holochain and Holo.
Sure. I basically got into all of this redesigning the architecture of the internet work through political theory. Oddly enough, I wasn't a software developer. I was somebody who was interested in how communities steer themselves, and I was mostly focused on how can we actually steer ourselves well, even at really big scale, even at global scale, because it seems to me that the structures we're relying upon right now, the processes we're relying upon right now, aren't working very well. They result in us going to war quite often. We're killing the planet. It doesn't seem like individuals are largely happy with the way that things are structured today. And so for a long time, that was my focus. And without going into all the details, about a dozen years ago, I started to realize, oh, wow, there's a whole different way that we can do all of this steering, whether you call it governance or economics, etc., that is based on discretion rather than violence, based on choice. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to pretend like violence is going to go away entirely, but what I had realized was that we had an opportunity to build the mediums of communication that could enable us as a species to steer at really big scale using some of the same patterns that we use naturally at small scale. And that was kind of my journey into this. And by the time I was finishing law school about 11 years ago, I had a bit of an epiphany about how that would need to work. I didn't know all the details on the back end of how to build it, but I had basically a roadmap of how the internet could function in ways that would enable communities to self-steer. And I've been on the side and more recently full-time pursuing that ever since.
Well, that's really interesting, because you had like much more of the big idea, and then the technology came afterwards, if I understand well.
Yeah.
How do we make that happen?
Yeah.
Now that we were talking about technology, I think like something that is really interesting, as I said at the beginning, is that the conversation nowadays is very much about the different protocols, different blockchains, the highest throughput, the most secure one, but it's all in the sphere of blockchain. And I haven't heard a lot of different proposals it's just proposals within the sphere of blockchain. Some others, like Hashgraph and Holochain, are going on another path. So with that introduction, can you tell us a bit in a nutshell, for somebody that has never heard of Holochain, what Holochain is?
Sure. I'll start by trying to actually contrast it with blockchain a little bit as well. But I'll give sort of an overview. I'll then do a compare and contrast between sort of where blockchain comes from, and then a little dive into what Holochain is. Holochain is a way of building and running applications that operate on just the devices of the users themselves. right? So it's basically a way of doing communication, whether that's Twitter kind of communication with small micro messages that are kind of broadcast to a bunch of followers, or an Uber-like thing where people are offering and accepting rides, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these ways of communicating, we basically made it so that you can do that without any company in the middle, because you don't need any web server in the middle. The World Wide Web today is dependent on web servers. That usually means that there's some company in the middle. That wasn't the design, but it has been the result. And that's just a side effect of the fact that it's a pain to run a web server. Most people nowadays don't run their own web servers. They pay some other company to do their hosting, or they go to a platform like Facebook where it's not just the hosting, but the entire design and the storage, all the content is under the control of that organization, that company. So we were really looking for bottom-up coordination and to enable something richer than the current pattern does. So in order to make that a little more visible, I'll try to contrast blockchain and holochain. The blockchain folks were interested in something similar, but if I'm going to be precise about it, blockchain comes from Bitcoin. Bitcoin came out of the cypherpunk movement. Nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is, but whoever they were interacting with the other members of the cypherpunk community. And the cypherpunk community was pretty narrowly focused on one problem, and that problem is, I want to be able to interact with someone without the government usually being able to whack me with a stick. So I want to be able to interact free of coercion by others. And I can't be certain that that party isn't inside of the community, so I don't want you to be able to whack me with a stick either. They got really fixated on, can we do digital anonymous interaction? And that ended up really focusing primarily on, can we do digital anonymous cash transfers? Some kind of that. Can we create a digital anonymous cash? But again, they were focused on freedom from constraint by others. We had a slightly different objective. That's an important goal, but it's not the only thing on the planet. The objective that we were focused on was the ability for you and I to be able to constrain our own behaviors, to be able to opt into some shared set of rules by which we're literally giving up freedom, right? And then as a result, be able to create a social space within which we might be able to take risks with one another. We might be able to make ourselves vulnerable in particular ways, in part because of the constraints that we've put on that social interaction. And the way that we think about, and we wanted to be able to do that without needing anyone else to participate as the referee, the judge, the one who's sort of making that space safe. Our take on this is that instead of freedom from constraint by others, we were focused on enabling freedom to constrain ourselves. This is the pattern that people use when they play a card game with some friends at their home, right? You don't hire a referee. The different people who are at the table agree, these are the rules that we're going to play by. And if somebody picks up a card when it's not their turn, somebody else goes, hey, it's not your turn. And what happens next depends on how seriously they take this game, right? It could be that that person gets asked to leave. It could be that they forfeit that hand. It could be that we just say, no, put the card back down and put it somewhere randomly in the middle of the deck. That's a pattern that enables that community to coordinate, to play some game together. In that case, it may be poker. But it could just as easily be Twitter or Uber or Facebook or something much more interesting than any of those. And the real objective is to enable people to communicate and coordinate with others in ways that are opt-in. Where you want to play like this and I want to play like this, we can. We aren't dependent on it also working for someone else's business model, right? That actually enables us to try new things. And to try new things, just you and me trying that new thing. Even if nobody else wants to communicate that way. Hey, if you want to do it and I want to do it, we can try it. And if it works, maybe we'll keep using it and maybe it'll spread. We think this is actually the pattern that nature uses. It's a key component of how evolution works. That the rules of the game are defined by actors choosing to participate in that game, which is very different from that game being defined from the top. Even the blockchain world is actually not about decentralizing power. It's about centralizing it. Centralizing it not with one individual, but centralizing power at the network layer, at the community-wide layer. There's massive advantages in the blockchain world of having more people on your chain. It makes it harder for others to commit fraud. But what that does is that actually points the whole point of blockchain technology, to be honest, is to centralize perspective, to get all of the different members of the community looking at something in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. There's cost to that. The benefit is, hey, we don't have to know anything about one another, and yet we can create some amount of safety for how we interact. But the cost is, oh man, everybody has to keep track of everything that everyone else is in. We actually don't get to learn from the different vantage points that the members of the community had. We don't get to see the world from their perspective because we're essentially randomizing whose perspective becomes the truth for this little 10-minute window of history or whatever slice of time that blockchain happens to divvy blocks up into. And so from our perspective, blockchain is actually just repackaging the old with new clothes, right? It replaced a monarchy, the one big company in the middle, with an oligarchy, the group of miners in the middle of that particular blockchain. And it has drawbacks not only in terms of speed and scale and cost that all the folks in the blockchain world are already familiar with and are working desperately to try to solve. It also, and probably more importantly, has incredible drawbacks in terms of composability and adaptability. Right? Adaptive capacity comes from this pattern of what we refer to as mutual sovereignty. That you want to do something, I want to do something, great, we can try it. And nobody else has to take the risk. If it works, great, maybe we'll keep doing it, maybe that pattern spreads. If us doing this dance wants to align with somebody else doing a slightly different dance and we come up with a new game to play together, cool, we can. And you're able to get this layering, this emergence of coordination. This emergence of coherence, but it happens in this sort of organic way. It's a very different pattern. From our perspective, it's the difference between a network and an ecosystem. We can go into more of that later.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's basically from a technology perspective when comparing blockchain to the ecosystem of Holochain is then basically in Holochain doesn't have this consensus mechanisms, right, that blockchain has.
Because consensus is literally about centralizing perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
It's getting everyone to see things in exactly the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And then how does that happen exactly on the Holochain ecosystem? Does that happen? So basically every agent, its own network? Or?
So we think of, I think the easiest way to think about it is to shift from thinking of applications as like a place that we go to, which is the current paradigm, to applications as a language that is spoken. Where is language held? Well, it's held within the brains and bodies of the participants. English doesn't live in a dictionary. If it did, you and I couldn't have this conversation right now because I don't see no dictionary. Right? Do you and I have consensus about English? Do we have perfect overlap in our internal versions of English? No. And we don't need it. As long as we have some overlap, we're able to communicate. And if I say something that is foreign, you'll go, huh? What was that? And I'll use additional words to explain what that means. Like if I said, We call it Holochain because the fundamental principle underlying our system is this concept of holographic storage. In other words, this idea that each part sees the whole, but from its own perspective. In other words, that each of us can learn English, but the English that we know is based on the English that we've been exposed to, the words that we've encountered in our lives. There is consensus. There is mutual overlap. And when we realize that we don't have overlap, we can use additional words, like I'm doing right now, to explain what that unfamiliar thing does. And it doesn't create perfect overlap, but it creates additional overlap. And the next time I say something like holographic storage, you might not know exactly what it means, but you'll have a much better idea than the first time you heard it, right?
Yep.
And through additional interaction, we'll be able to come into greater and greater alignment.
Yeah, got it.
The question that most people have at this point is about validation and safety.
Mm-hmm.
Holographic storage, this pattern, is the key to learning, essentially, and adaptation. But I describe it as nature's preferred pattern for data storage and social coordination. Simple example to make that visible. Beehive, right? You've got a beehive, and one bee goes off exploring in this direction, and another bee goes in this direction, and another bee goes in that direction. Well, this bee holds within its own body information about whether it has found pollen or not, right? Whether it being here and present and alive means, hey, it didn't die over there, right? It's not synchronizing with the entire community. That information is embodied. It's literally in the body of that bee. Well, if that bee often it searches for pollen, and it goes a little further, and it finds some pollen, and it comes back, and it does a little dance. Some other bees see it do that dance, ooh, and they go off in that direction, and they find pollen, and they come back and do a little dance. And pretty soon, the entire colony is harvesting the fruits of this discovery. That's wonderful. What would happen if that bee went off and didn't find pollen, and it went a little further and a little further, and it went so far that it wasn't able to make it back? Bummer. We lost a bee. But life goes on. What if instead the community depended on global consensus for exploring the territory around it? What if instead the entire colony had to go to see if there was pollen? And if there wasn't, they'd have to maybe go a little further and a little further. Oh, they weren't able to make it all the way back to the hive. Well, that would be catastrophic failure, right? Extinction. Nature favors holographic storage as its preferred pattern for data storage and social coordination because it gives a community the most amount of learning in context for the least amount of risk. The risks are borne locally. The costs are borne locally by each individual running that experiment. Mm-hmm. But the learnings can propagate. This is also how bodies handle threats. There's no global consensus. It's that one cell sees an infection and it goes, ooh, there's a problem. And it does two things. One, it signals to others, hey, there's a problem here. Two, it moves to take action. It moves to start combating that infection. Other cells receive these signals, ooh, and they start to move into action. When they arrive on the scene, if they find infection, they go, oh, there's a problem here. And they signal to others and they move to take action. And this repeats until the cells that are showing up to deal with the problem find that there is no problem. The infection has been dealt with and they stop signaling to others. We refer to this as an immune system response. Immune system response. It's how we manage threats to coherence in our bodies. It's how we manage threats to coherence in our card games, right? It's not perfect, but it gives the community an ability to deal with threats while minimizing the cost, right? Mm-hmm. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the thing, I just don't want to forget also some of the I don't want to not mention some of the questions that the community had as well. So maybe I'll just jump immediately on some of them.
Yeah.
Well, I had there were some people were wondering about the how is the Holoport. First question: if it's the Holoport, if it's still available to buy, and how does it work in the ecosystem? What's the function
Sure.
of the Holoport?
So there's two things I should make visible. One is, I'm going to turn on a light. There we go. Hey, a little more light now. Two things I should make visible. One is, good enough. Holochain and Holo are two different projects. We have two projects. Mm-hmm. Holochain is a pattern for building peer-to-peer applications. It's not a platform. It's a pattern, like HTML is a pattern. Nobody pays their HTML bill. They don't have to go to a place to access HTML. It's a way of speaking. If you want to speak that way and I want to speak that way, cool, we can communicate, right? Your browser happens to know how to handle angle bracket B, blah, blah, blah. So when somebody codes a web page using that, you see it show bold, right? Mm-hmm. Holochain is a pattern. We're giving it away for free. In order to subsidize that, we're launching a Holochain application, an application that's built using that pattern. Mm-hmm. And that application is a service application. It's actually intended to be used by lots of other people who are building Holochain apps and running Holochain apps. Holo is the name of that application, and Holo is essentially peer-to-peer web hosting. With a Holochain app, people have to run it on their own device. They have to have their cell phone, right? And the other party has to have their cell phone. And everybody shows up as both a user and a provider. We have all the rights, but also all the responsibilities of being a member of that community. Now, it's not a lot of responsibilities, but you have to have a device that's running the app. To make adoption easier, we're making it that Holochain communities, because again, these are applications that are basically run as a community rather than with some company. Holochain communities can invite in visitors. That visitors can interact with them, and the way that that happens is that the community members serve out HTML web pages. So that anybody who opens a browser and types in a URL can interact with this community, this application. But from their perspective, they're just going to a website. On the back end, what's happening is that certain members of that community are volunteering to use the spare computing capacity on their desktop, Holoport, etc., to serve out web pages. When a query comes in, they reach into the back end, the peer-to-peer application, and they pull back, if it's an Airbnb-like app, they pull back the photos and the descriptions and the prices for the locations that are available to rent this weekend in Paris, right? And they package that up as an HTML file, and they serve it out to the person who's visiting the web page. When they do that, the developer pays them for the work that their computer is doing, just like today, those developers pay Amazon Web Services to do that exact same kind of web hosting, right? It's in the current model, it's Amazon who's providing the web hosting. And on the back end, they're still using a distributed system of computers, right? They don't have like one giant computer that serves everything. No, the query comes in, they reach into the back and pull together the stuff, and they send out a web page. It's the same here, except it's a community that is the back end rather than just a corporation. Holo's business model is that we take a percentage when the people get paid. They get paid using a cryptocurrency we designed. So the developer pays whoever did that web hosting. The developer pays the host for the web hosting that they do. And when they pay them in Holofuel, which is a cryptocurrency we designed specific for this purpose. Its advantages are that it can handle millions or billions of simultaneous transactions, and it's efficient enough that we can do transactions that are worth less than a penny. That's a big game changer. Nobody's been able to do that before. You add that on top of Holochain, and we were able to crack the problem that lots of people have wanted to do for a very long time of peer-to-peer web hosting.
Yeah.
Holoports are dedicated host machines in that ecosystem. You don't have to buy a Holoport. But we wanted there to be at least 300 machines that were on 24 hours a day, that were quality, right from day one, because we wanted this ecosystem to have a solid foundation right from the get-go. We didn't want people typing in a URL and sometimes they get a website back. So we launched an Indiegogo campaign. We ended up raising 5 times as much money as we had originally hoped to. After it was all said and done, we raised over $1 million. And we've got between 1,000 and 1,500 Holoports that will be hitting the world sometime in the next 6 months or so. I'm not exactly sure on what our shipping date is. We don't currently have a store up. We were selling through Indiegogo. We shut that down a few weeks ago. We are planning to set up an online retailer where people can purchase Holoports. But the truth is, you don't need to a Holoport to participate in Holo. You can use an existing server. You can use your laptop, your desktop, etc. And that's the point. The point is to be able to make use of idle capacity, idle computing capacity.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you don't need the Holoport. You can also use your idle computing capacity to be part of the ecosystem.
And you don't need Holo to run Holochain applications, right?
Oh yeah.
Holo, you don't need to use Holo at all, but we're trying to make it very easy for people who are running Holochain applications, visitors, to visit them, and creating an entire economy to facilitate that. And in exchange, our business model is that we take a 1% or less transaction fee. Unlike Uber and Airbnb and Apple, where it's 20 or 30%. No. For us, this is all of the accounting, the creation of a marketplace, and payment processing for less than 1%. And we think that that's a pretty valuable position, and so we expect that people will make use of it.
I mean,
that's actually how we're subsidizing the entire ecosystem, right? That's how we're subsidizing the larger Holochain ecosystem.
Interesting. It also shows that the first use case for Holochain, which is interesting to see. Speaking of use case, let's say I'm a developer and I created a Holo book, let's say, or like an app that resembles a Facebook on
Sure. Yeah.
Holochain. How does that work from? You mentioned that there is a Holofuel. Then I would get paid as a developer in Holofuel. And how does that work? Is that can every developer of every single app create their own model? For example, I can create my subscription-based model, and another one can create a free model, a HoloTube or something like that. Is that possible?
Yep. Absolutely. So the truth is, Holochain applications, like I said, don't need Holo. If you build some Slack-like app and you use it to communicate with the members of your team, we might never even know that it exists, let alone have any way to charge for it, right? So people can come up with whatever business models they want. They can do subscription-based business models. They can do taking a transaction fee for certain kinds of interactions, like we're doing with Holo. They could run ads. There's a whole bunch of different business models available. Holochain business model, it's something that we're subsidizing. And in part, that's to enable people to use it in any way they want. Now, will people start accepting Holofuel for doing different kinds of work? Maybe. We designed it to foster hosting. We recognize that it will likely become a very useful microcurrency because it seems to, we think it's going to work better than anything else on the market for small transactions. People will use it for lots of other small transactions. Are people going to be using it for transferring $100 million? Probably not, because we charge a 1% transactions. That would be $1 million in that $100. But for microtransactions, it may end up being something that people use a lot. And people can come up with other patterns. We fully expect that people will take our architectures that we're pioneering in the cryptocurrency space, and they will start doing similar things for other assets. Holofuel is an asset-backed cryptocurrency. It's backed by the asset of the computing capacity that people are making available for hosting. But you could fully do the same cryptocurrency design for other systems, things that are like electricity-backed currencies, or food-backed currencies, or babysitting hours-backed currencies, etc. Right? So people can design different currency systems, but we think there's a lot of inspiration that people are going to take away from the model that we've created for this mutual credit cryptocurrency that we've created. I'll leave it there for now.
And Matt, does that mean that the more assets there are in the ecosystem, the more Holofuel is created then?
At some level, yeah. I mean, there's a relationship between what is the asset, how much Holofuel is there, and what's the price of Holofuel. The supply of Holofuel is actually flexible. This is an unfamiliar pattern for most people. Most people are familiar with blockchain. We're going to have only this many tokens, and that's why it's going to be valuable, because you can't make any more tokens. But that's our take on it, is that just creates lots of volatility. And we wanted a medium of exchange. We actually want Holofuel to be relatively stable in value. If it's not stable in value, then people hold on to it. They don't want to use it, right? Dollars are relatively stable in value. People don't invest in dollars. They hold on to dollars and they use them as a medium of exchange, right?
Yeah.
But our goal was to create a medium of exchange currency that people would use. The whole goal is for it to foster lots of activity. How does the ecosystem grow in value? It grows in value because the assets that it enables, that it fosters interaction with, grow in value. Right? That there's more and more assets playing that pattern, more and more people engaged in that pattern. That's how real value is created. Anything that's on the other side of this is essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? Yeah. Real value is created by people finding something and then them engaging in it. I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and as you said, it's very different from the blockchain projects that we've seen with a set supply, and in some cases burning tokens and bringing that supply even lower and lower.
One thing I'll say there is, I know that we're going to be misunderstood on this for a long time to come. I know that people in the market, especially the cryptocurrency exchange markets, are going to see the pattern that we're doing, and it's going to be so unfamiliar that they're going to go, oh, God, that's a scam, sell. Until they look closer and until they see it actually working. At that point, we'll see lots of adoption. But the adoption is not going to come from the cryptocurrency investors. No. The adoption is going to come from the use. Right? It gains in value because it's actually getting used, not because it's being speculated on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good word, speculation. I think I agree with you. I think that from that part of the crypto space, from the investors and speculators mainly, then they'll be skeptical about this, because then they look for the quick,
until they dive in deep. There's some folks, I'm not allowed to give names, but there are some folks who are very deeply involved in the world of cryptocurrency and all of that. That once they dive in really deep, go, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't see this before. Yeah. And those folks, they tend not to place day trade type bets on us, right? These are longer term. Oh, I see what this is going to grow into kind of plays.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what those are the guys I'm talking about. The short-term traders and the daily traders, and for them, I think they just go like quickly for just a quick buck, and then that's it. But they're not looking at the long term, and which I think in this case makes of course much more sense, that it has to be very valuable for the users, which is the case, right? And that's a real long-term value.
Yeah.
Now, hey, having said that, maybe just like before we get out of the topic of the apps in the ecosystem, I think that and the use of or non-use of the Holo fuel. Maybe just to understand one thing when we were talking about from the developer's perspective, and then if I would like to monetize my app, and then I just get paid on Holo fuel, how would that person, that developer, be able to change or exchange that token for a Bitcoin or fiat, for example, to get, at the end of the day, pay for bills?
Yeah. We are planning to operate some forms of exchange ourselves, but for hosts, right? Yep. In general, developers, it's not our intention. This certainly could emerge as a pattern, but it's not our intention to be having developers getting paid in Holofuel. It could be, but what we were designing for was for hosts to be getting paid in Holofuel. And if you earn Holofuel by doing hosting, then you can cash it out with us. We're planning to support a few different forms of currency that you could transform or exchange that out for. If you're not, we're fairly confident that there will be other exchanges that will show up. We may end up participating in setting up one of those. But we haven't announced anything around that. I don't have knowledge of anything in particular around that. We've just discussed, like, yeah, we're probably going to do this. Truth be told, there's going to be lots of other folks as well. Even though our pattern's a little foreign, some different exchanges and things, I think, are already taking a look at how can they play with this. And we haven't made all the judgment calls on this yet, but there's a bunch of exchanges trading our ERC20 token, which is the temporary coupon that will later get exchanged for Holofuel once we launch Holo. And I think if one way or another, whether it's by continuing to have those, we call them Holo tokens, by continuing to have those, or through direct Holofuel to other form of currency exchanges, people will be able to redeem. That's my expectation. And for us, that's really important, because really this stuff is all about recognizing contribution, right? It's about fostering recognition of contribution. And if you're able to exchange into other currencies, suddenly other people are able to recognize the contributions that you made within this community. Like your landlord can recognize the contribution that you made on the hosting front, because you did a bunch of hosting, you earned some dough, and then you use that to pay rent. After you exchange. So yeah, that's how that will likely pan out.
And specifically on the Holoports, how are you guys planning to? Well, you already mentioned that you are producing the first batch, but how in the long term? How are you? What's your strategy on a number of Holoports per user, for example, or on another way of saying it is, how would you avoid one particular user, like an enterprise, for example, having a huge bunch of Holoports, and or is that something that you care about, or is something that
well, we don't have a target for number of Holoports, because again, our focus is the Holoport thing is sort of a hack to try to make sure that the ecosystem is solid right from the get-go, right? And to give early adopters a bit of a advantage, like that hey, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to be super techie. I bought the thing, I set it up. It's pretty easy to set up. And then it earns for me while I'm doing other things, right? It's just running in a closet or something. And it's sort of the equivalent of mining in our community. It's just, you're not doing useless computation and then throwing it away. You're doing useful work that somebody else is actually willing to pay to have done, right? You're doing web hosting that somebody else wants done and is willing to pay for. Sweet. so we don't have a target there. The other question around, what if some big enterprise wants to come and dominate the space? We structured Holofuel and the hosting stuff in ways where we think even really lightweight, low capacity devices can play an economically viable role in this ecosystem. I don't expect big enterprises to step in right away and try to compete in the hosting market. I think the margins here are going to be less good than they are for them in their existing business. Like Amazon has built up all stuff, right? And they charge through the nose for it. This is a competitive marketplace, not a monopoly. They're not going to have the same monopoly power. So I don't see that happening right off the bat. But if somebody did, the advantages that they would gain would have to do with lower latency, things like that. The things that other people might do would be to offer things at a lower price. Applications have different needs. Sometimes you just need an extra version of the data in backup, right? It doesn't need to be live. It doesn't need to be real time. I'm looking for cheap storage there. The way that we've designed Holo, we don't think there's a significant advantage to co-locating servers. And so the advantages that would traditionally be gained by an enterprise player, we think is not significant. It's not that there's no advantage, but I think there's less advantage than there is in other architectures. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, got it. I think like from my side, we have covered all the things that I had. I don't know if there's anything else that we didn't mention that you would like to talk about.
Well, I guess I'll say this. We're working at the moment on Holochain. We're growing pretty quickly. Over the last year, we've gone from 5 or 6 of us that have been working on this for a few years. I've been part of the team for about 4 years now, to almost 50 today. And much of that growth has been just in the last few months. So it's been a journey for sure. And this was an all volunteer project. We now have funding. We over $20 million in an ICO, and we raised over $1 million through the Holoport sales and developer training things. And so now we've got to deliver. And the big thing for us right now is getting people building Holochain apps. You can build them now. It's not secure yet. It's not a full stable release with all the security reviews. It's still in alpha, but people are building really cool stuff. And
that's something interesting. So if for all the developers that are listening now, question number 1 is if I'm as a developer, do I need to learn a specific language, or can I use a language I know already? And 2, where can I find all the documentation?
Sure. So for the first question, Holochain is, most Holochain apps today are built in JavaScript. We're trying to make Holochain as easy as possible for people to play with. And the underlying stuff is, we've got 2 versions right now. One is built in Go, and the other is in Rust. The Rust version is primarily to enable us to support mobile. And we just got that. Our first versions are now we're starting to have Holochain apps running on mobile, which is like, woo, big milestone for us. But the applications themselves are built in JavaScript or Lisp. We do also support Lisp. Down the line, we're planning to support a bunch of other languages. But the truth is, for this initial stage, we're going to try to make sure that JavaScript is really supported, because it's the most widely used language out there for doing any sort of web development. And then where to go? Holochain.org has links, and that's HOLOCHAIN.org. You'll find links to our GitHub. You'll find links to our online community. There's a chat. We do have a Telegram channel as well I think has 50,000 people in it. It's mostly, at this point, conversations about cryptocurrency stuff, which is less interesting. Our online community through our website is basically an open source alternative to Slack, Mattermost. And that community has some incredible conversations. There's thousands of people in that community as well, but they tend to be really deep, interesting conversations where people are proposing ideas for applications and then coming together and building them.
Yeah.
They're also just having conversations on everything from governance to biomimicry to quantics to app development. And so those would be the things I would check out. We have a developer documentation site, and we're putting a lot of effort into making Holochain easy to learn how to do, despite the fact that it's kind of a foreign pattern. Like most people, even blockchain developers, aren't used to building actually distributed applications. They're used to building at least logically centralized applications, maybe on a distributed network or a decentralized network, but we're building actually distributed applications. So there's a little bit of a switch.
Yeah.
Perspective in terms of how you have to think about this stuff. But there's a lot of support online for.
And the other thing, I saw on your website that you guys have done some hackathons. Do you have any plans for the coming months? To maybe you can talk about that?
Yeah, I don't even know what the numbers are now, but I think we've done something like 15 hackathons and meetups in over 40 cities. That's growing every week, basically. I think we've got a hackathon planned this month in Denver, Colorado, and another one planned in Australia. I believe that's in Sydney, Australia.
Oh, cool.
The Denver, Colorado is mid-July, and I don't know the actual dates on Sydney, Australia, but those things are generally aired on our website, on the holochain.org website.
Well, it's really cool. So I think that specifically about the meetups and hackathons. If you guys want to do something here in Europe, let us know, and then we and the blockchain markets community can help you with organizing something for the community. That
sounds wonderful. Yeah, we've done a fair bit of we've done a lot of events in Europe. Europe's been our primary focus, to be totally honest. Mm-hmm. I expect that Eastern Europe is where this takes off first. I think Eastern Europe has a mix of high literacy, lots of developers. Many of those countries have really high quality internet, but also lots of problems, lots of ways in which existing solutions aren't actually solving the problem. Mm-hmm. So I think there's this perfect sort of matching of capacity and need in one place. So my hunch is the earliest adopters are Eastern Europe, with the rest of us all to follow.
Cool. Having said that, I think we covered everything. Of course, for everybody that wants to know more, I'll leave a link in the description to Holochain's website, and you can take it from there. If you're a developer and you want to look for documentation, you just go there. Or if you want to know more about Holoports, everything is in there. Or go to the different social media channels, and then you can ask directly.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much, Matt, for your time.
Ryan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's been very interesting to know more about Holochain.
Yeah, one thing I will say in terms of Europe, we're sponsoring a conference at the end of this month that I and one of the founders of Holochain are going to be speaking at, me and Arthur Brock, and that's called Open.coop. It's in London. It's July 26th and 27th, and that's focused on participatory forms of organization, new ways of working together where there's no company in the middle, basically. And so that should be kind of interesting. It's a less tech-focused crowd generally, but they're needing solutions built. Mm-hmm. So it should be, it's going to be really interesting to see the worlds of software development and these people who've been focused on participatory organization come together over the coming years.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting combination. Then, what's the name of the conference, and when did you say it?
Open Co-op, and it's open.coop. Open.coop. It's a community, but they do a conference once a year in London, and this one's July 26th and 27th at Conway Hall, I think,
Cool.
in London. Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah, I'll tweet about it, so then the members of the community that are in the London area can buy.
Wonderful, Ryan. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
No, thank you, Matt, and thanks to everyone that has been watching this video. And I'll see you all in the next episode of Blockchain Markets. Cheers. Bye bye.